Jane Andrews was the working-class girl from Grimsby who won the trust of the royal family.
She came into contact with people that she never thought she'd meet, people with monies, people with yachts. Her life was completely changed.
She was no doubt a social climber. She had ideas above her station.
All she wanted was to permanently access the upper classes.
She wanted to get married. She was desperate.
But she led a double life. A respected member of the royal household who hid a series of violent and volatile relationships from the palace. Tommy Cressman was her ticket to the life she craved.
Tommy was a good catch.
Successful businessman, had the car, had the boat.
But Jane Andrews had a dark side that she couldn't control.
You're not where I want you to be. Why aren't you? I want you here.
Conceited.
Manipulative.
Possessive.
Basically a bunny boiler.
And her violence would stun everyone when she slaughtered her wealthy lover. In one of Britain's most calculated killings.
Premeditated, totally cold-blooded, brutal, murder.
While Tommy Cressman spent the day at work brokering new business, Jane Andrews was plotting to kill him in cold blood.
God help any man that gets involved in a relationship with her.
Two parallel lives, destined to tragically collide. This is the story of Jane Andrews' countdown to murder. "15th of September 2000, Nice Airport, France. A blazing row erupted between a couple in the departure hall. He was Tommy Cressman, son to a multimillionaire. She was Jane Andrews, former personal dresser to the Duchess of York and trusted employee of the royal household. Andrews confronted her lover and asked where their relationship was heading.
Oh, we're getting married. You need to make a commitment.
She was very keen to get a ring on her finger.
Tommy delivered the news she was dreading. By doing so, he signed his own death warrant. He would never marry her. This was Jane Andrews' trigger for murder.
If she wasn't going to have him, then nobody was going to have him.
Jane Andrews had a humble upbringing in the Lincolnshire town of Grimsby. Her father was a carpenter, but work was hard to come by. Her mother was a classroom assistant and the main breadwinner. Money was always tight. Andrews remembered as a child having to look for small change down the side of the sofa to buy a loaf of bread. She struggled with education, frequently skipping school. Eventually, social services contacted Jane's mother and informed her of the truancy. The shame and disgrace Andrews had brought to the family name was too much for her to bear. At just 15, she took an overdose. Andrews survived, but her parents were deeply worried as she toiled with depression and panic attacks.
As she went on and got older, she became more troublesome for her parents. She seemed to be rather mentally unstable. She was suicidal.
Andrews' continual truancy took its toll on her schoolwork. She left with few qualifications and went to the local college to study fashion. Tommy Cressman's upbringing could not have been more different. His American father, Harry, was a multimillionaire businessman and a former director at Aston Villa Football Club. It was a privileged start to life for Tommy. He came from a large extended family and was privately educated at the prestigious Stowe School.
My sister and Tommy and myself, all born of two American parents, but we've grown up and lived all our lives in England. We both went to Stowe School, and then he went off to Baylor University in Texas to further his education. He became this very sort of interesting cross-mid-Atlantic mix between public school boy and American preppy.
Tommy excelled at university, earning a degree in business administration, and then went on to work for a respected bank on the east coast of the USA. He returned to the UK in December 1985 at the age of 24, set up his own business and bought a flat in Fulham, South London 2 years later. He had 2 serious girlfriends, but neither endured. He was married to his business. When she was only 17 and still at fashion college, Andrews fell pregnant and had an abortion. Andrews had a chronic fear of abandonment, and despite the termination, she continued with the pattern of sleeping with boyfriends on the first night, fearing they would leave her if she didn't.
She was very needy and quite troubled emotionally. She went along with certain sexual acts that she wasn't really wanting to do, but she wanted to keep that man.
After fashion college, Andrews was still living with her parents in Grimsby, but dreamed of leaving her small-town roots for a better life. She spent her time flicking through high-end glossy magazines, aspiring to the lifestyle they portrayed.
Andrews was quite worried about the direction she was going in. Really, what she needed was to be removed from the Grimsby environment, perhaps to fall into some line of work that would give her some sense of respectability.
She was quite a driven person. I think it seemed she wanted to get away from where she was born and brought up.
Andrews' first step on the career path was a job designing clothes for a high street store in Grimsby. But it wasn't enough. She wanted money, success and power. At the age of 21, Andrews answered an anonymous advert for a personal dresser in a society magazine. When she was invited for an interview, she couldn't believe who it was for.
Of course, it was only when she was given the directions of where to go that she realised it was for the Duchess of York.
The interview went well. Andrews and the Duchess hit it off from the start. A week later, and much to her excitement, Andrews was offered the job. Her dream of leaving Grimsby and living in London had come true.
As far as Fergie was concerned, she was just happy to have somebody who she thought would be able to keep her clothes and all the rest of her personal effects in good order.
But the royal family had unwittingly employed a would-be, cold-blooded, obsessive killer. After a troubled childhood that involved truancy, an abortion and attempted suicide, Jane Andrews' life seemed to be back on track. When at 21, she landed her dream job, working as the personal dresser to the Duchess of York.
And suddenly she found herself transmuted from Grimsby into the royal household, working alongside people who were intimates of the royal family, travelling with the Duchess on some of her tours and visits, travelling abroad with her. Her life was completely changed.
Andrews felt as though she had arrived.
By association with the Duchess of York, Andrews assumed a class of her own. She's a girl from Grimsby who ends up working in royal service, attending silver spoon events and all the rest of it, and really moving in circles that she couldn't have possibly imagined she might move in when she was younger.
It was a position she adored, and Andrews became completely immersed in her new world.
She almost tried to morph into the royal family. I mean, she dressed like the Duchess and almost elevated herself as if she wasn't an employee, but she was a friend of the Duchess.
Andrews was a trusted aide, and she was really very up close and personal with everything that the Duchess of York was doing. She was her dresser, she was the keeper of her secrets. The pair used to go on holiday, so she was really at the heart of the Duchess's personal life.
Andrews had the dream job. Now all she needed was a husband. In April 1989, she met computer executive Christopher Dunn Butler, 21 years her senior. He had the wealth and status that Andrews craved, but there was someone in the way, a girlfriend. Andrews charmed Dunn Butler, and they had a secret affair, but after a few weeks, she demanded commitment. Dunn Butler dumped his girlfriend, but not before she'd received an anonymous delivery. It was a box of chocolates containing rat poison. The police proved the presence of poison, but could not trace the sender. Could this have been the first clinical and ruthless strike by a woman determined to secure a husband?
We couldn't prove that it was Jane Andrews that had put the rat poison in the chocolates. But what it does do is a signpost that she was manipulative, obsessive, jealous, and, would resort to violence if she didn't get her own way.
Everyone spat the chocolates out in time and the police took no action. And in August 1990, Andrews and Christopher Dunn Butler married. Andrews' job with the Duchess of York gave her status, and now she had the double-barrelled name to go with it. The memories of a troubled childhood in Grimsby were far from her mind.
She embraced London and London life and London society, and I think she was one of these people that was, keen to get on.
Like her career, Andrews' social life took off. Despite her marriage, she conducted a number of affairs, one of them with a bodyguard attached to the royal family.
There was this marriage, but it seems that Andrews hadn't taken it very seriously because was intent still on flirting and indeed having affairs with other men.
Andrews admitted the affairs, and her marriage to Christopher Dunn Butler faltered. She then met a Greek shipping tycoon at a charity event organised by the Duchess of York. They fell in love, and Andrews finally left her husband to move into a flat that the Duchess of York had rented for her. But her controlling demands and jealous outbursts destroyed the affair. When he wanted to end it, Andrews exploded, slashing his clothes and trashing his flat. Fearing for his safety, the wealthy businessman decided to buy her out.
She was given several £1,000s, really to get out of his life.
There was another boyfriend that she'd exhibited the same behavioural traits with, jealousy, manipulative. Virtually every relationship she'd been in, she displayed these behavioural traits.
Andrews couldn't cope with yet another failed relationship, and aged 28, tried to take her own life again. She survived, managing to keep the overdose a secret from the only stability in her life, her job and relationship with the Duchess of York. Andrews had to safeguard her role with the royal family.
There was no inkling at all on the Duchess' behalf that this is a woman who really had two sides to her character, presenting an image of herself as this humble and loyal servant, while in the background clearly having, strangely mentally deluded tendencies.
But matters were taken out of Andrews' hands in 1997, when Fergie's finances hit rock bottom.
The Queen has always had a soft spot for her extrovert daughter-in-law, but there was no hiding the royal irritation at the Duchess's financial management.
Really bugs me that every day I have to read I'm a millionaire 3 times over.
The Duchess and her children haven't been on their usual midwinter holiday, and generally her travelling's been reduced. All evidence that money has become tight.
The royal household and the Duchess of York had to cut costs. After 9 years of service, Andrews was made redundant. She lost her title and her identity.
Andrews felt that her loyalty had basically been repaid with being completely abandoned, and I think that really hit her hard. Well, what was she going to do next? She had been used to wining and dining and rubbing shoulders with the glitterati of high society, and really, where was she going to go from here?
The poor girl from Grimsby, who'd beaten the odds to mix with the wealthiest family in Britain, was back at square one. Now she had lost the only security in her life, compounding her anxieties and leaving her more fragile than ever. Life in London seemed over, but she still had an unfaltering desire to remain in high society.
There was no way that Andrews was going to go back to Grimsby after a life that she had led, and she had made friends in high circles and was very sociable and liked going out to parties and wanted to maintain that lifestyle.
Within 6 months, she was back working in an exclusive jeweller's. Here she would meet wealthy clients and start to rebuild her social life. In December 1998, she was invited on a blind dinner date, and it was here that she met her next wealthy lover.
It was a sort of organised get-together by this friend that they had a few drinks in a central London bar and chatted away with her for a couple of hours. Then she left Tommy and Jane to their own devices.
39-year-old former stockbroker Tommy Cressman was the perfect catch for Andrews.
He was a very attractive, good-looking guy.
Tommy had an infectious personality that Andrews couldn't resist.
Tommy was a very, very good-hearted, very caring Libran, very well-balanced, fun-loving person.
His American father, Harry, was a multi-millionaire, having built up one of the biggest chains of Ford dealerships in Europe. But Tommy was also a successful businessman in his own right.
Tommy had made his car covers business work very well. He was very actively trying to develop the business. You know, Tommy was still a young man. You know, 39 years old, business is moving, things to do, full of energy, you know, loads of life, wanting to make things happen.
After all her failed relationships, Andrews had found the man she hoped would take care of her, marry her, and keep her in the jet-setting lifestyle she'd become accustomed to.
She was no doubt a social climber, and Tom was a safe pair of hands who had considerable income, had a nice house, townhouse in the borders of Fulham and Chelsea, successful businessman, had the car, had the boat, and came from a family that, you know, had done well for themselves.
She wanted to get married. She was desperate to get married. Tommy was a good catch. He was successful, thoroughly nice guy, and I can't blame anybody wanting, you know, to marry him.
The chemistry between Andrews and Tommy was instant.
Typical Tommy would have said, "Richie, I've met somebody new." He seemed quite excited, so that was great. We were happy for him.
The relationship couldn't have got off to a better start.
Tommy was quite an excitable chap, and she seemed, they seemed, you know, happy to spend time with each other.
They saw each other every day, and it wasn't long before they were both ready to take the relationship to the next level.
In fairness, they moved in together, you know, within a fairly short space of time. I think from their initial meeting, I don't think it was much more than 3 months at the most.
Andrews settled herself into Tommy's flat and left romantic messages for him to find. It was a whirlwind romance, but Jane Andrews wanted more than love.
The police officer came up to the bedroom and gave me the news that Tommy had been found dead.
Jane Andrews was the girl from Grimsby who ended up working for a princess. But ultimately, her all-consuming desire to forge a permanent role in the upper class would destroy everything she cherished.
The Duchess of York had no idea that behind this facade lay an enormously disturbing temper, huge fits of anger, and a history of mental illness, suicide attempts, and gross promiscuity.
By the age of 31, she had already endured a teenage abortion, one adulterous marriage, attempted suicide, and several chaotic, sometimes violent relationships. The only stability in her life was her job as a royal dresser to the Duchess of York. When she lost this position, her life seemed over. But fortunes changed again for Andrews when she met wealthy former stockbroker Tommy Cressman on a blind date in London. Andrews saw Tommy as her ticket back to the high life.
He was always very charming, very entertaining. He always loved to be opening a bottle of champagne and enjoying the fun of people together and doing parties and so on. He was a very, very, very gregarious, fun-loving person.
But as with all her previous relationships, she soon became possessive of her new lover.
She was exceptionally jealous, to the point that if he was seen talking to another woman, she would come over and drag him away. It was that kind of relationship. He was hers and nobody else's. I don't think he particularly liked that.
Tommy had gone on a stag night trip to Germany. Jane Andrews didn't want him to go.
When they landed, there was a barrage of voicemails on his phone, bearing in mind it's switched off when you're travelling on an aeroplane, saying, why aren't you ringing me? You know, all this obsessive, possessive, jealous behaviour. And indeed, when she couldn't get hold of him, some of his other friends that she knew about on the plane, they had a load of voicemails and texts saying, where is he, what's going on?
Her insecurity didn't end with jealous phone calls. She wanted to secure Tommy as hers with a commitment of marriage.
Well, I just remember that occasional sort of dinner party conversation where there would be other people and she might come up with something direct, and it usually evolved about their relationship, and it sort of always implying that, Tommy, you're not committing to me, or, you know, where are we going? Tommy's DNA was never one to have an argument with anybody. You know, it was just not his style, and he would just not react.
Andrews became so paranoid about Tommy that she began hacking into his emails.
She found a series of emails to a young woman that Tom had met on a business trip to Las Vegas. We sent a couple of my detectives over to California, where the woman lived, and we interviewed her. They actually had never had a sexual relationship. Tom and this young woman were communicating with each other via email. Nothing physical had taken place, and it was clear that nothing physical was going to take place.
But one email crushed her plans for life together with Tommy. It described Andrews as a pair of old slippers I cannot throw away. Andrews was furious. She couldn't afford to lose another man. That night she confronted Tommy.
I think just plain possessiveness. Obviously she'd only decided in her own mind that she'd think the absolute worst.
Andrews was furious, but Tommy calmed her down and convinced her to join him on a family holiday to the Italian lakes. It was a chance to patch things up, and she thought perhaps he might even propose.
I think we were the last people to see them before they went on the holiday. I think the last thing I remember was Jane whizzing down our hall on one of the children's scooters. Everybody was very happy. We said goodbye and wished them a very happy holiday.
I'm sure that she was thinking, we are going to go and have a nice holiday. I'm sure she wanted to go. I think on reflection, I think Tommy would have been a lot happier if she hadn't. Hopefully Tommy would still be here.
It was on this trip that Andrews had hoped Tommy would ask her to be his wife.
And they went to the lakes in Italy and took the little mahogany reever that he'd refurbished and went to a big gathering of lots of reever speedboat owners.
But Tommy had no intention of marrying Andrews, and he was even beginning to question their whole relationship.
I think he knew it had to end, but he wanted to try to end it gently. He wasn't a confrontational person. As I say, he was a very, very soft, kindly person, and I think he just didn't want to have a huge fight.
But Andrews had no idea what Tommy was thinking. She thought the holiday had gone to plan. Sun, sea, champagne, and the millionaire lifestyle. But as it drew to a close, the arguments restarted.
I think, unfortunately, there was some rows and arguments while they were actually there with other friends and guests that were at this big gathering, which was, I think, embarrassing and difficult for Tommy to cope with.
The underlying tension between Andrews and Tommy was beginning to resurface.
Jane just did not want it to go wrong, but unfortunately exacerbated the whole situation because, in a way, she was trying to demand that it went right. And you can't force something to happen. It's got to happen naturally. She didn't want to lose maybe a lot of the good things that went with Tommy.
Andrews decided that Tommy had to commit to her. On their way home in Nice airport, an angry and frustrated Andrews confronted Tommy on the subject of marriage. It was here that Tommy delivered the news she'd been dreading. He would never marry her. It was the ultimate rejection and the beginning of Jane Andrews' countdown to murder.
By then, it was abundantly clear to her that the relationship was over. Her life started to crumble. She'd already lost one relationship. All was going wrong again, and she clearly, in her own way, loved Thomas Cressman. But leaving her was a sin which she would not forgive.
We had to prove she had the motive, and the motive was that she was spurned, that Tom Cressman said, "I don't want to marry you," and that sent her over the edge.
He'd made it clear that he didn't want to be with her, having been told that, you know, it was not going to be the ongoing relationship that she wanted. She was just really having a tantrum about it all. She just, you know, didn't want to accept it, I guess.
After their row, Jane called a friend and told her what had happened. Eventually, they both calmed down and boarded their flight home.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We shall be cruising at an altitude of 33,000 feet and hope to land on time in London.
As they flew back to Britain, Tommy slept while Jane drank. She sat, quietly contemplating how she was going to deal with Tommy's rejection.
He got himself in a corner, and I don't think we all realised what that corner was really turning into.
They returned to their home in southwest London, where they continued to row.
She was clearly in a very distressed state, an emotional frame of mind. One can only imagine how that continued once they got home.
Tommy wanted Andrews to get help, but she was having none of it.
I think her possessiveness is what really undid Tommy's feelings in terms of being prepared to make that commitment. And I think he'd tried to actually get her to see someone to try to help her mentally with some of these issues. But, you know, it never worked.
They went to bed that night, exhausted from the arguing. The following morning, the fighting restarted, but this time it was different. Andrews was inconsolable with rage.
This big argument kicked off. It clearly got pretty uncomfortable.
And there was a huge row. It's quite clear. By that stage, it had become clear that any thought of marriage was out of the question, that the relationship was in effect over.
Things were running out of control with Jane, and the situation was becoming unbearable for Tommy. He wanted to try to solve the problem.
The argument turned violent. Tommy feared for his safety, and at 11:35 a.m. he dialed 999.
Emergency services.
I'm having a major fight with my other half.
Anyone injured?
Not yet.
Where is the other half?
Staring at me. We are rowing, and someone's gonna get hurt.
What do you want us to do?
I would like someone to stop us hurting each other. If we don't have somebody here soon, somebody is going to get hurt.
That was a very telling recording. It was an extremely unfortunate recording as well, because, and I think the police learnt quite a lesson from this, there was a man in a state of desperation phoning the police and asking for help. So worried was he about what might then happen. The police ignored it and suggested that they could do nothing until a crime had been committed.
He had rung the police station. He had said, you know, someone needs to get round here, otherwise someone's going to get hurt. The decision was made at Fulham Police Station that it wasn't urgent.
They didn't want to respond because in those days the attitude was nothing's happened. Tommy was trying to be, I think, protective of both himself and Jane.
Exasperated and shattered, Tommy called his best friend. It was the last time they'd ever speak.
Phone rang. Richie, it's Tommy. We split up. Why? On the holiday, towards the end, she wanted to know, you know, I think she thought I was going to propose to her, which I had no intention of doing. We had a big argument this morning, and she'd left. She'd driven off somewhere. And he said, oh, that's the other line going. I would imagine that's her. I'll call you back.
But Tommy never did call back. At 1 p.m, Tommy walked across the road to his office to take his mind off the situation. While he was gone, Jane Andrews returned to the flat and hatched her murderous plan. First, she packed a bag and placed it in a wardrobe. She then took a carving knife from the kitchen and hid it under her side of the bed. A cricket bat belonging to Tommy was already within reach. When Tommy returned from work that evening, he relaxed in the living room, unaware that his killer girlfriend was planning her moment to strike. While Tommy watched TV, Andrews left the flat and went for a drive, giving her time and space to meticulously plan how she was going to get away with the murder of Tommy Cressman. When she returned, Tommy was in bed. She joined him at around 10 p.m. Tommy spent a few hours watching the coverage of the Sydney Olympics, while Andrews pretended to sleep, waiting for her moment. Tommy was terribly short-sighted, and once he'd taken his glasses off, Andrews knew it wouldn't be long before he'd be asleep. This was her opportunity to kill. Once she was convinced Tommy was asleep, she climbed silently out of bed and reached for the cricket bat.
It appeared from the evidence that he was clubbed over the head with his own cricket bat.
It would have dazed him at the very least, and maybe even knocked him out of bed.
She then grabbed the 8-inch-long carving knife from under the bed.
She put the kitchen knife through his rib cage
into the lung and nicking the side of the heart. The forensic evidence was that he would not have died immediately as a result of that injury. He would have been aware probably that he was dying.
Although there wasn't a lot of blood at the scene, what happens, the cavity of the lungs and the rib cage fills up with blood. Basically, he bled to death.
You know, it's just awful. I mean, what can you say? It's premeditated, totally cold-blooded, brutal murder.
Having left her murdered boyfriend lying on the bed, Andrews tied her bathrobe cord between the bedroom door and the banister.
This was no more than a pathetic attempt to rig a scene. It was almost a case of laying the cord over the one and then over the other so that she could later claim that she had tried to prevent him chasing after her. But she must have known that when she left that room, she had killed him.
Andrews then showered, dressed, grabbed her bag and left the flat. When Tommy didn't turn up for work on Monday, the police were alerted.
I got a phone call from a colleague who was driving into the office on the Monday morning. He said there's something going on, lots of police and everything around where Tommy lives, and I don't know why, but I just knew something bad had happened.
On Monday afternoon, 2 days after the murder, the police broke into Tommy's flat and entered his bedroom. There they found Tommy's body, face down, spread-eagled, on the bed that he'd once shared with Jane Andrews. His head had been split open, exposing his skull, and there was a 4-inch gaping hole in his chest. The kitchen knife was recovered from underneath the bed. His cricket bat was found on the floor at the end of the bed. Jane Andrews was the prime suspect. When the police appealed for her to come forward, she covered her tracks by texting her friends, professing her innocence.
Friends were making attempts to get her to give up. Even the Duchess of York, I think, made such an attempt.
We found out she had a car, which was a Golf. I think it was a VW Golf. We got the registration number and we circulated that to all police forces in England and Wales.
She travelled to the south coast where she was caught on CCTV buying underwear. The police were closing in on the murderer.
We were tracing her mobile phone because obviously she was using it, and if you use a mobile phone you send a signal. I think 2 days later, in the early hours of the morning, Devon and Cornwall police sergeant on routine patrol found her in a lay-by, which she'd taken an overdose of paracetamol.
Again, Jane Andrews had tried but failed to take her own life. Once she'd made a full recovery, she was arrested and charged with the murder of Tommy Cressman. Now she would face the Cressman family from the dock at the Old Bailey.
There wasn't a moment, really, when she reflected the feelings of others, least of all the man she killed.
Jane Andrews had it all. She'd been the Duchess of York's personal dresser and was dating one of the most eligible men in Britain. When she demanded he marry her, he refused.
She couldn't cope with that, and we all know what happened.
Her trigger was rejection, an inability to deal with a situation that she didn't like.
Andrews attacked Tommy with a cricket bat before stabbing him in the chest, puncturing his lung and cutting open his heart. Forensics proved the knife had been partially withdrawn, then plunged back into his body with a twisting motion. On the 23rd of April 2001, Jane Andrews arrived at the Old Bailey and went on trial in front of a worldwide media audience for the murder of Tommy Cressman.
The first 2 or 3 days of the trial presented a picture which I'd never seen in a courtroom ever, and I don't think I've seen it since. Every inch of floor space on the floor of the court was taken up. Where there were no chairs, we had journalists sitting literally on the floor, 1 or 2 of them almost at my feet as I stood up to address the jury. It was one of those cases where you wanted to listen to every word.
Andrews claimed she'd killed Tommy in self-defence, that he was trying to rape her, and she swung the cricket bat at him to fend him off. She said when he attacked her again, she stabbed him with the knife.
To throw absolutely disgusting slurs on Tommy's character and to our family's name in the process of the trial and the appeal, no, it's just as low as you can go.
She murdered him in life, and then she murdered him again in death by trying to ruin his reputation.
But her defence team couldn't prove her story.
The police investigations all supported Tommy's character as a person in every way. They actually ended up basically branding her an out-and-out liar.
She came across as possessive. Everything that she said was focused on herself and the effect that it had on her and her feelings. And there wasn't a moment, really, when she reflected the feelings of others, least of all the man she killed.
With Andrews claiming the killing was in self-defence, the prosecution had to build their case against her.
Dealing with a homicide, you explore every single bit of intelligence you get. The challenge is converting that intelligence into evidence that will be accepted by a criminal court.
The police discovered 2 notes left in the flat by Jane Andrews. They read,
"My dearest parents, I'm so sorry. No more hurt inside me anymore. Tom hurt me so much. He was so cruel to me."
They also found a ripped-up letter to Andrews written by Tommy.
Dearest Janie, I have tried and tried to make you happy and do things for you, but it never seemed to be enough. Your mood swings have been hard to predict. The jealousy has also gotten out of hand. I must be part of your life, not all. The same for you. I hate to see you so upset. Tommy.
The trial at the Old Bailey lasted for 3.5 weeks. On the 16th of May 2001, after 11 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jane Andrews guilty of murder. In his sentencing remarks, the judge accused Andrews of leaving Tommy to die without remorse.
The evidence of that killing demonstrated that it was likely that it was premeditated, with her having fetched about her the tools with which she was going to do the killing.
If you go downstairs, take a kitchen knife, and then go up and stab somebody, that's not an accident, that's not self-defence, that's murder.
After the trial, Tommy's father spoke to the press.
I feel the worst part, without any doubt, was hearing the story of her battering him first with a cricket bat and then sticking a knife into him, partially removing it and sticking it into him again. What could be worse for any father?
God help any man that gets involved in a relationship with her and it doesn't go the way that she wants. I think she's very capable of extreme violence, and let that be a warning. There's 5 defences to murder, and she ran basically every single one of them. She didn't do it. It was diminished responsibility, that she suffered from mental illness or physical illness, that she was provoked into murdering him, and that she'd been sexually abused.
None of us can ever enjoy any of the family occasions that we would have liked to have done with Tommy. For all of us, the life sentence is a complete life sentence. No get out of jail.
I think she's a danger to society. She's got a history and she should not be released. Full stop.
When my little baby brother arrived, he was a dream come true then. To see him gone was just the most awful thing in my life. The most awful thing. And it just should never have happened.
And you can see the next new episode of Countdown to Murder this Thursday on Channel 5 at 9 with Dennis Nielsen's first kill.